Today's episode is brought to you by the letters LOVE. And what does that spell? Love. And why am I talking about love? Because if you love what I'm doing with Wise Squirrels, you will drop by wisesquirrels.com/love. I love you so much, I included a link right here in the podcast description that you can just click the link and visit the page to find out how you can spread a little love to a certain Wise Squirrel. Welcome to Wise Squirrels, the podcast for late diagnosed adults with ADHD. I'm your host, Dave Delaney. And you may notice, if you've listened to the show before, and I hope you have, welcome back, if that's the case. And if not, welcome to the podcast. I normally have better equipment to record with, but today I am recording in a hotel room because I'm traveling for work. I'm in San Diego, lovely San Diego, California. Somebody who's not far from me, actually, over in Oakland, California, is the one and only Christina Coravos. Christina is an ADHD coach and therapist who works with women to help them succeed in their careers, and you can find her over at walkwithchristina.com. Sadly, too far a walk for me from San Diego. Before I jump in, a quick reminder that the content provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice or diagnosis or treatment. I'm not a medical professional, nor do I play one on the internet, so always seek the advice of a qualified healthcare provider regarding any medical condition, including ADHD. So reliance on any information provided by this podcast is solely at your own risk, so just go talk to your doctor. All right, let's get on with the show. I began our conversation by asking Christina about how she got into the ADHD space.
I discovered ADHD when I was an adult, my late 20s. I was running a tutoring center, and I noticed that a lot of my students that I worked best with, and we seemed to be on the same wavelength, had ADHD. And then I went to graduate school to get my master's in counseling and became a therapist. And as I learned about the diagnostic criteria and read them in the DSM, I realized, wow, this is quite relatable.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started working with clients both at the tutoring center and then also in my practice as a therapist, and then realized that I worked from my own direct experience best with women similar to me and in career-oriented capacities, and just really finding ways to set up systems and environments and support that are a natural fit.
Were there commonalities that you've come across in women typically with AD? I don't mean symptoms necessarily. I mean more like their backstories.
Oh, backstories. That's interesting. Yeah. I guess many of the women that I met were diagnosed after their children got diagnosed. Say they were in their 30s or 40s, and then their sons or kids in school were getting a diagnosis, and as they were meeting with the doctor and learning about ADHD for the first time, they realized they fit the criteria and the genetic connections.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I tend to notice that a lot, where parents with kids with ADHD discover, they too have ADHD. It seems that seems pretty common. It's interesting.
Yeah, and actually for myself too, once I was already an ADHD career coach, someone in my family came out to me and said, hey, never told our family about this, but I was diagnosed like 10 years ago and figured, Chrissy, that you would understand. And I was like, wow, I do. No wonder I always got along so well with you too.
Tell me a little bit about your backstory, like what led to becoming, to studying to become a therapist, and sort of what that background looks like.
Yeah. It's funny, the different kind of spontaneous connections that happened.
Yeah.
Another, I guess, relatable or common story I've heard in the career path of people with ADHD, I have some connections with as well. And in my early 20s after graduating college, had periods of unemployment, of kind of unexpected roles in retail and stem cell research and pottery and banking, in website design, in as like a cashier, just a bunch of different jobs, and was really trying to find something that fit with my strengths. And I thought back in my childhood, I'd always loved playing school. I used to make worksheets. I even made standardized tests. There was one called the Coravos School Standardized Test. And that was something I did in my free time. And my sister and her friends would come over, and they thought they'd get to, play dolls or play outside. And I was like, no, teacher Christina is here. You have this test to take. And it had like multiple choice sections. And I ended up sending score reports and percentiles to my parents and their parents. And so as I thought back about my teaching background, I also was a classroom teacher. I realized that I liked the one-on-one connection and the energy that tutoring provided. And so I started working as a tutor, and then from there I became a team leader and then an office director. And so during that time I was learning my own strengths, and then also seeing a lot of the stress, I guess, that students and families were under. So to answer your question about the therapy background too, I was trying to integrate some of my own experiences and help families navigate the anxieties of the high school landscape, college applications. And I found that it did help me working with my students, but it also really helped me in my own career in communication and management. So since I was now, after years of finding a way to enjoy my work in a way that was natural for me, I wanted to help other people do the same.
The teaching thing kind of stands out to me too, because like I've done a fair amount of that, not in any sort of actual teaching, like a real teacher, but more like you reminded me of something when you talked about your childhood and teaching friends, because my mom found this old computer printout, now like dating myself, but like dot matrix printer designed. I did a computer class for my mom and my brother when I was a kid, and I created like an invite with a picture of a computer on it, and it said, "Come to Dave's room at 8 p.m. for your computer class," kind of thing. And it had a picture of
that.
Yeah. And so, and I taught them things about the computer. And as I got older, I started, I studied improv with Second City in Toronto and started performing improv a lot, but I also taught improv. And nowadays I teach communication skills to companies with workshops and training and a lot of, keynote presentations that I do as well as a speaker. So, it's just interesting how that kind of connects as I find like ADHDers are such giving people typically, and they like to share and they like to learn. So, but to your different jobs too, that's also kind of reminiscent for me, because it's not so much like what you want to be when you grow up. It's like what you want to be next week.
Yeah. Yeah, I do see that. And the teaching thing I've seen as a common thread too. Like when you find something when I found something that I learned, like my poor sister, I was learning stuff in school, and then I was just a couple years older than her and just testing her on it, or kind of teaching it to her right away. But just, wanting to share what is interesting and helpful. And
are you still in the Bay Area?
I am.
Okay.
I'm in Los Gatos, California. And I think the variety in my current role has made it really fun. I still get to do some of the, hands-on, still one-on-one teaching, but also teaching groups sometimes. And then even, management is like teaching too, helping the tutors who are newer to the team.
Do you find teaching like being out in that neck of the woods, obviously and having done work, I spoke on behalf of Google for 5 years. So I spent some time in Mountain View and in that area. But I do find that a lot of both entrepreneurs and technologists. ADHD seems to be quite common in those worlds, and so, yeah. What are your thoughts? What are you seeing? In the field.
In the field, like at companies, in terms of who has ADHD, who's maybe not in my little bubble of the tutoring center.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the innovators do. I've also, I guess I don't know if I'm as involved there. I've kind of, I've stayed a lot in the education field, I guess, and in like the mental health field. Though I have been giving some talks at companies. I had one earlier this week. And so maybe from there, I'll start learning what's broader in the field.
Yeah. Can you share the company? What were they?
I think so. It was First Data Bank. They hired me for a talk about, I guess, ADHD accommodations and how to support team members with ADHD as part of their mental health affinity group.
And what were some of the takeaways, some of the things that you were sharing there? Because this is really applicable to a lot of people listening who, either work with folks or who are themselves, who have ADHD. So, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my favorite parts was that I was kind of giving an introduction to like how ADHD shows up, how do you get a diagnosis if you're noticing some of the symptoms, and then ultimately what do you do to create an environment that's supportive. And it was fun to talk about some of the things that I've developed over the years, or just done in my own life and practice, and then to hear that other people have had the same stories, even simple things too, just like, timers and body doubling and visuals and, taking breaks and, there were some follow-up questions too about kind of how to, communicate about it. That was kind of an interesting question. I don't have a clear answer on it because I've seen mixed, I guess, results on when someone does have ADHD, how do you bring that up to your team or manager? And because often they may not have the solution, even if they want to help. So then it's kind of back on you sometimes to come up with your solutions.
That's something interesting too that I've been talking to a few folks about, which is nowadays when you apply to a job, 9 times out of 10, or probably 10 out of 10, you're doing it online. And when you apply to a job now, you get to a part of the application that asks, do you have like a mental illness or something to that effect? And ADHD is listed in that list of things. And you have the answers to say yes, no, or I don't want to answer, or I prefer not to answer. And so if I put myself in the shoes of a HR person, not to encourage discrimination, but like if somebody is hiring and they don't know enough or anything about ADHD, they may choose to not choose that person for an interview because they said yes. And if they said, I prefer not to answer, that probably means yes, because why say that instead of no? And I was speaking to somebody about this the other day, and they said they put a big X through that whole section back in the day when they would apply to something. But because it's online now, you don't have a choice to advance in the process without choosing one of those. Yeah,
I appreciate this topic the power of like relationships when you know someone, and yet the requirements as part of the job application process right now that you can't really, I guess, get around it. I mean, even in my own life, I heard from my psychiatrist that I had all the traits and could, complete the assessment. But then I thought about like, what are the real, benefits of the diagnosis? And I think there are many benefits to having the diagnosis, but I guess the two that came up for me were like, okay, well, then I could get accommodations or I could get medication more easily. But if I'm not planning on using medications right now, or if I'm already kind of setting up my own accommodations, is it beneficial to have the diagnosis? So, because then kind of, as you said, what impact will that have in future job applications or life.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, certainly, and this isn't to like scare people off from applying for jobs, because at the same time, many companies now, many savvy, smart companies at least, are hiring neurodivergent team members because of all of the great traits, great skills folks have, being very adaptable, being very creative, and things like that. So, yeah, I suppose it is interesting in choosing whether or not to be diagnosed. Because for me personally, I suppose one aspect of this, and this is also my understanding of what psychologists or psychiatrists look for in the diagnosis, would be for late diagnosed fellow wise squirrels listening, is ADHD or is the potential for having ADHD causing problems in your life, causing disruptions, causing enough issues to be diagnosed.
Exactly. Yeah. And when I was reading the DSM for the first time, I remember seeing the line about the symptoms have persisted in a way that causes a significant impairment in academic, occupational, or social functioning. And so you might have all of the traits, but that, I guess, final piece of the impact.
So one of the blog posts that you wrote, or I guess Medium posts that I really loved, was reframing your strengths.
That was one of the most popular things I've done in my workshops. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about reframing ADHD traits.
Yeah, it's funny to even hear the word reframe, because this is the way I've naturally seen things. So it's been, I guess I realized as I was working as a therapist and a coach that all of these traits that I saw as positive things or neutral had negative connotations. So I'll give some examples. A common trait that someone with ADHD might be told they have is that they're forgetful. And I see that as being very present, being not stuck in the past, being absorbed in the moment. And so I think it's great when my mind is clear and I'm not ruminating or thinking about things, and I'm able to be still.
Yeah.
And so I've always thought of forgetful as like, great, to now.
Right. Well, you also think like neurotypicals are always talking about, like, you hear a lot in pop culture, and in this folks are striving for flow, like getting into flow, and that's not a problem for us.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, the hyper focus there.
Yeah.
And so I've never really thought that I should remember things. I'm like, oh no, I definitely need to write this down. Oh, I need to set an alarm, or I need to, send myself an email. And so, it's just I find like a lot of these traits are just natural and easy to work with. I'd like to share actually a few more.
Yeah, please.
The other common ones. I think disorganized. When I think that one actually maybe did stick with me a little bit. And I realized, like, if someone's disorganized, that simply means that they're spontaneous or adaptable, or the system that they had before isn't a natural fit for them. And so it's like they can create, new things rather than be boxed in. I'm like, that's a great trait. And then, like restless, like, this person is alive. They're energized. They're free to engage.
Yeah.
What are some of the other ones that people often think are like negative traits? Or like, unmotivated. I'm like, nobody's unmotivated. And I notice this a lot with students and with clients and even myself. It's like everyone wants what they want. They're motivated, to get what they care about. But
to your point about that, I think of myself as a kid in school, and I was such a pain in the ass because I was a class clown to the teachers. But now reflecting on that, I know that I was that way trying to get laughs, which is something I've done through my whole life. But that laughter is a response, and that's a dopamine hit.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so if you're not medicated you're lacking dopamine. And so finding ways, healthy ways, hopefully, to get dopamine, then that's that. And that accounts for why I love being on stages in front of audiences.
Yeah. Yep. I enjoy that too. Yeah. The intensity of the speaking and exercise too. And I also think that whole, motivated or unmotivated, or say you're not doing homework and you're going for laughs. I think that people with ADHD are really good at focusing on impact and things that matter. And so it's easy. I can think of a student who was not attending classes, not completing assignments. And ultimately, it didn't really matter because it wasn't having a significant impact. And they were in classes that, weren't helping them move toward the future they wanted to create. And so, and they knew they could just drop the class. And so, but when there is a real reason or benefit, I ended up working with this student, and they're now in a new school and in a new program. And what do you know? It's aligned with their interests, their desires, and they're, completing their assignments and showing up to class. So, yeah.
Do you have tips for people who have to do work they don't want to do?
Yes. So I deal with this all the time in my own life. The main thing that I do is I tune into the reason. I guess there's a few different things. One, I believe everyone is ultimately doing what they want to do. It might not, let's see, it's nice if there's an example. I don't love cleaning up spreadsheets or cleaning up my desk. So instead of focusing on I have to do this, I'll focus on I want this done. And sometimes that means I don't even have to be the one to do it. And people with ADHD are very creative about getting things done or connecting with other people who like to get things done for them. At least I've noticed that in my life. So yeah, I'm trying to think of something else that.
So you're saying outsourcing or delegating?
Outsourcing, but also realizing I ultimately never have to do anything that I don't want to do. And so sometimes I'll also go to the extremes. And I'm I don't want to sleep on the sidewalk. I would like to be able to pay my rent. And then suddenly I'm okay, well, the easiest way would be for me to show up at work. Right. I already have that little system in place.
Yeah.
But then I might think I think I'd like to make a little more than in a way that's, easier. And so to really get to the extremes and identify what outcome do you want? Oh, and I also love this game too. Another game I play with myself when I don't want to do something. I test myself and I say Christina, do you have the guts right now to just not do it? And the moment I give myself that freedom of what if I don't pay for my car registration? Or what if I don't, respond to this message? Then I have the freedom to realize oh, you know what? I don't want to get stopped by the police. Or oh, you know what? I really do like this person. I'm just kind of confused about what to say. So let me, try. So giving myself that freedom and that consequence of not doing it helps me shift into the authentic reasons for why I want it done.
It also helps to put things in perspective too, right? I often a lot of some of the training I do is in public speaking, performance with teams and companies, and I say I'm not here to teach you brain surgery or how to fly a plane, right? If you screw this up, it's not the end of the world. Don't worry, because. Yeah, you can make little mistakes, and certainly in public speaking and things like that. My kids are both. My daughter especially is more of a theater bug, and my kids both are musicians. They both play in band at school and stuff. And I say if you hit a wrong note with a band playing, the chances of it really standing out, and even if it does. People forget pretty quick. People are pretty forgiving pretty quickly too. But even in a play too, if you're doing a performance and you flub a line or you forget your line, just say something else and just keep going forward. And then, the audience doesn't know that you just picked a line out of the air, and hopefully the other actors are good enough to
Exactly.
pick up on that, and the beauty of improv, I guess.
Yeah, and I just noticed, like, when I see somebody else make a mistake, how empathetic I am and how impressed I am that they, like, had the courage. And so the more I can see myself and, like, hey, you went for it. At least you did something, or, like, that took some guts. That helps with the, going for it.
Yeah,
Trying new things.
that's
Yeah.
yeah. No. I was going to say that this is something that I'm noticing now too, where I've always tried my best to be empathetic, but I think I'm more empathetic now to others because I'm starting to suspect that, like, all these people that I come across or people that I know, they probably have ADHD and they don't even know, or they know and they haven't done anything about it. But, so, if somebody, like if I'm trying to build a relationship with a new friend and they kind of ghost me for a while, I just now I'm thinking of approaching it that way instead of, like, feeling all rejected and jumping into like RSD and all these things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole ghosting thing. It's funny how often people have told me, like, oh, I'm sorry to get back to you for a while. And I'm just like, that was already out of my mind. I'm just happy to see you again or to hear from you. And so when I have those moments of, like, oh man, I got a little backlogged, like, oh, I should start with the I'm sorry. And, like, you know what? Maybe they're not thinking of it either. And maybe they forgot.
Right.
About the reply too.
Yeah. It's my own narcissistic way of, like,
Yeah.
don't you know who I think I am? Like, why were you thinking about me at every moment? Come on. What's wrong with you? So the women you see are typically what, 30s and 40s? Is that right?
Yeah, I have a fair number in their 20s too. But yeah, I'd say mostly, I guess, women in their 30s and 40s. A few men every once in a while if they're a good match, working on the same things that my skills are a match for. But yeah, women. Yeah, I think in the ADHD field too, there are a lot of male psychiatrists and male, I think, of just diagnosed in boys when they're younger, historically. And so to find someone who's a woman who has experience with it can be beneficial. I know I like that aspect when meeting with someone, if, like, hey, do we have some shared experiences?
Yeah, as a naughty boy syndrome or whatever it was considered back in the day. And I think a lot of people are still learning about that. What are some of the challenges you face in your business, in your practice?
The first one that comes to mind is I'm trying to, structure myself and make the same systems that I help my clients with.
Yeah.
And then you also mentioned, I think, RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria. Yeah. And so the perfectionism, the anxiety, a lot of the women and myself were, I guess diagnosed first with anxiety before they realized that ADHD is a more, I guess, useful term or more specific term rather than just generalized anxiety. So,
well, people don't realize that too, that anxiety is a symptom or comorbidity.
Comorbidity.
Yeah. That anxiety is actually, and depression can be a symptom of ADHD. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I was diagnosed with anxiety before ADHD as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think working with the emotional side. And so that's one of the things that I like to include by having small groups as well, because being diagnosed as an adult woman and then not knowing anybody or only knowing about the male or kid symptoms that are more familiar, it can be isolating. And so it's really liberating and comforting to know that, I guess one of the main things is just, like, the house stuff is often challenging with ADHD, to, like, be maintaining some of the tedious maintenance and cleaning aspects. And so when we share our tricks for different, routines or the emotional exhaustion that can come with that, it's helpful for everyone.
What are some of those tricks to help with that?
Well, I guess I often like someone else who helps me with it. And actually, also for the past few years, I've lived in like furnished places and small places. And so having small, manageable spaces that I keep clean so that I'm not distracted has been really valuable. I also don't do a lot of cooking. That's a common one that comes up. Like I'll buy food, but I won't spend a ton of time preparing it. And, I have my little bag that has, what I need in it. I have things set up in a particular way on my desk. And so, yeah, having an environment that just makes sense to my brain and getting other people to help out with some of the basics, whether it's friends, partners.
Yeah, my son and I were watching, he put on some YouTube video we were watching the other night of like these ridiculously expensive houses. And there was one that was just like epically ridiculous. And I think it was like 150 million or something insane like that. And I mean, it was pretty badass. I mean, a lot of it, I was like, I don't need a basketball court in my house like this one had. But it also had like a water park thing, which was pretty cool. I love a good water park. But seeing it, and I just commented to him, I'm like, that place would be so cool at first and then so lonely most of the time.
Yeah.
Like 99% of the time when nobody's visiting you and you don't have people over, and you're by yourself, it would be so lonely.
Yeah. And tying back to your question, it's really nice to have friends who have different things that they want to share. Like, I don't have a basketball court or a pool. Well, I kind of do have a pool, actually.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Connecting with, people who want to share resources, that makes it a lot nicer.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Then I don't have to maintain it all myself.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, it takes away. So what you're saying is like cutting back, or almost even downsizing, or yeah, just having what's manageable and what's really needed, which I think is important for anyone. Really,
Yeah, and you can be part of like a gym or a pool place, or you can have colleagues at the office who help out with different things. And so I like to use, my own strengths. I'll be responsible and take care of what I need to. But why not let other people who really enjoy that part?
Yeah. And what about with group sessions? Are you doing that virtually or in person?
I am primarily virtual right now, and one of the main reasons for that is that it's helpful when my clients are in their own environment, and we can set up things immediately and directly, whether that's screen sharing a calendar or communicating with colleagues or friends. Whereas in person, to be in an environment and then to have to remember and apply things, it can be less impactful. So most of my sessions are online. Though I do actually have a group that's starting in person next month.
Certainly as it pertains to like loneliness and things like that in person tends to work well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that something you found?
Yeah. And I mean, my own life, I have a lot of in-person contact.
Yeah.
So when I'm going to the tutoring center, I'm meeting up in person with my students. And so I definitely think that's an important component, especially just from the stimulus perspective too for ADHD. If I'm just at my desk and there aren't other people around, it can be more challenging to be, prompted and inspired to get moving on the next project, even if it's fun.
Yeah, makes sense. Hey, what are your thoughts on having ADHD versus being ADHD?
Interesting.
This is something I was delivering I have a new keynote I'm doing called The Root Down, which is partly about my own diagnosis with ADHD. There's more to it than that. But, and as I was speaking and delivering it, I announced I have ADHD. And then I started thinking, if I've always had ADHD, air quotes had, then am I ADHD? Have you run into that as far as language goes? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Having versus being and I guess the identity component. And what comes to mind first is like, I've kind of just skirted around that issue by being an ADHD coach. So I guess a diagnosis isn't required. And so I see it more, I often use the word traits as well. So like if you have certain traits and there are certain perspectives and strategies that work for you to help you get what you want or, live life in the way that you want to, then let's do that. And so I guess the having versus being, I guess I think of it as more as like, who do you want to be and what do you want to create? And so I don't know if I have a strong feeling about having versus being presently.
But there are days that like I want to be neurotypical.
Yeah. I guess what I would ask then is like, what do you think neurotypical is?
That's a good question. Neurotypical.
It's like, what are you trying to like accomplish or create? And is there a way to do that naturally the way that you are?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm trying to think of an example of that because we did talk a little bit about, outsourcing or delegating the things that you're not great at.
There's an intense piece of self-acceptance here that I imagine, someone who is neurotypical doesn't have to think about. Like, it might just be obvious for them to do things in a linear way.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the self-acceptance is certainly a core part of life in general, regardless, because everybody's certainly different. There's general groups, you could say neurodivergent, neurotypical, whatever, but obviously there's introverts, extroverts, and the list goes on. So accepting your own, and everybody, different people have different strengths and different weaknesses as well. So, wishing that I was, physically bigger or faster or whatever it may be. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I do actually. I love this question and this topic to get into like, what is it that I want to do or that you might think someone who's neurotypical can do? And then like how, I think we can still do it. And it's funny. I was talking with a friend the other day and I was describing someone. I was like, I don't think they're ADHD. My friend was like, that's like a compliment, isn't it? When you say people are ADHD. And I was like, I just see so many positives in it. So, but
there's so much misinformation out there, especially like on like TikTok and places where like ADHD has become like a verb. Like I forgot my keys. So, I was, or, I ADHD today or something.
Yeah.
And you do have to be diagnosed in order to know you have ADHD or that you are ADHD.
Yeah. And that's why I think the identity piece is kind of risky. And it could hold me back if I thought all the, negative perspectives on ADHD were true about me. And so.
But it's not a walk in the park. It's not, we often talk about ADHD strengths as like, superpowers and things like that. But it's also, it also is debilitating sometimes.
Yeah. It can be very hard to do things that seem like they should be simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what do you tell somebody who is facing challenges like that?
We'd find out what it is. Staying in the abstract is often can be confusing and debilitating. And so getting that clarity of what you want, like, I don't know, when I was in a different environment and like had COVID last week, I got really behind on some messages and started getting overwhelmed. And I felt like it should be easy to like, read and reschedule and do a lot of like tedious cleanup tasks and, fill in timesheets and all that. And it was really hard to pull myself to do that. And so, I don't know, maybe other people would find it easier to do that. But then I also see like, well, maybe those things really weren't the highest impact. And when I I'm clear on what I want. Yeah, I think that shift into focusing on what before how. I think I've seen a lot of people with ADHD focus so much on the strategies and like the how, like, oh, how do I do this? How do I do that? And it's like, well, what is it that you want to aim toward? Because often you can come up with a better way that maybe is easier for you.
Give me an example of that.
Like, I guess in preparing a presentation, it's very easy to, like, I just gave one on, I guess, accommodations for students. And so when I was thinking about preparing a presentation, and I was like, oh, I could give all these like different strategies. I like how long, and then you can just kind of stay stuck there. But when I realized like, hey, I'm here to show tutors ways that they can help their students be more successful, then it's, easy to put together the timing, the breakout rooms, the types of strategies.
So you're thinking
at first it seemed overwhelming. Be like, oh, how do I do this? How do I prepare for this?
Yeah. Yeah, you sort of envision the results, like the actual,
exactly.
like what you're trying to. This is something I run into where, and I think it triggers self-doubt and imposter syndrome sometimes too, where I don't think about the effects I'm going to have. Like, I know I'm a good speaker. I know I'm a great speaker because I get I have the feedback. I have 150 freaking LinkedIn recommendations about it.
I know, and then I have to like look at those again to explain to yourself. Right?
No, I totally do.
Oh my God.
I totally do. But again, it's I think about it from the client side when in reality it's the audience, and like if they have a great time and lots of laughter and they come away learning new things that they can apply, then I've been successful. And that, so that's kind of the positioning, I think. But also to your point about like, and what we were talking about earlier too, like with the presentation example, it's a good one because it's very near and dear to me, is when I'm spinning my wheels on creating a new presentation, let's say, I shift into a different method. So for example, I might write it out as a script, like write it out as a story, like just write what I want to say. And so I almost like write it out that way and then build the slides kind of backwards from that. Or I have like a storyboard template that's just blank of slides, like blank slides with notes. And I print like 10 pages of those with like, several per page. And then just start like, I'm a terrible artist, but I'll like sketch like a stick figure of what I would envision to be on that slide and then sketch it out that way and then build it after that.
Yeah. The more quickly I can create a visual for myself, then I have something I can respond to. So I love your example of like a stick figure, or even just like the story of like, this is, the end result. I often think of like the done state, like what does done look like? And actually that's something I've seen with a lot of my clients who are overwhelmed at work, and they have like a lot of different projects. And it's like, well, what are you trying to create? Do you have clarity from your manager? Do you know what you're aiming toward here? Because if that's not clear, then you can just have, infinite creative overthinking.
Yeah.
about what to do.
Yeah. I have, I wrote about this in my book in New Business Networking, but I also talk about it in presentations and some of the communication training workshops that I do, where the T, I go through an acronym for listen, and the T stands for test your understanding. And so it means like repeating the information. So if you give me a task like, Dave, I need you to deliver the report by 9 a.m. on Monday morning, repeating the information by saying like, so what you're saying is you need that report 9 a.m. Monday morning. Is that what you're saying? So, and by saying that, you then think, okay, well, I trust Dave. Dave knows because he just repeated it. He's good. But by repeating it out loud, I also retain that information. It helps me remember it because I've said it out loud. So I've tested the understanding. And then I could say like, so what you're saying is Tuesday, 10 a.m. Okay, got it. And you're like, no, 9 a.m. Monday morning. And that's where you can correct problems before they occur.
Oh, I love that example. That was honestly, I think one of the best things that I learned in graduate school was the value of reflecting back what someone said and how not only then do I understand what's been said, but I can be corrected, and then there's have that agreement. And this is also so important too at work and in meetings, to send a follow-up email like, okay, my understanding is this is the action item, or like, this is, what I'm planning to do. Let me know if it's not right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's especially helpful too, because like for me personally, my email, well, there's certainly ways I could do this probably better, but luckily my email has a pretty nice search engine built into it. So I can search for keywords and terms to remind myself so I can go back to the email and say, okay, yeah. So like, this isn't what I outlined. Christina replied, yes. Yes. Okay. Now I know. So I can go back and remember what it was that I needed to do. Like, to your point, like you're recapping that information, and then it's in the email so you can find it later to go back to, what was that other thing? Oh yeah. Right.
Yeah, so nice to have it in one spot with some visual reminders.
Oh yeah, big time,
Yes.
big time.
Yeah.
What I'm going to be mindful of time here, but tell us a little bit about body doubling, because that's something that comes up a lot, and yeah, I would love to share some more information about doing that.
Oh man, body doubling. So I have it twice a week just for myself, just hopping on a Zoom call and somehow doing the work with someone else in the room, whether it's physical or virtual. It's so much easier than when I'm just like alone trying to drag myself to do something. And so to hop on a call and say, okay, I'm going to work on my taxes, or I'm going to respond to some emails, or I'm going to clean up my kitchen, or I'm going to work on that spreadsheet. And then to know that someone else has like heard that. And then at the end of the call to share some wins, celebration, accountability on what happened. It's so valuable. Have you used body doubling before?
Not really. I and certainly not since I was diagnosed with ADHD or ever heard of it.
Oh,
so I have a couple friends who are both working on their books. And I always love this idea where they did the Pomodoro technique of 20 minutes working, 5 minutes off. And what they would do is with Zoom, 20 minutes would be spent writing. And so they would just be writing, no talking. And then every 20 minutes, they would have 5 minutes to either share what they just did or talk about the weather or whatever. And once that 5 minutes was up, get back at it for another 20. I know the timing isn't probably ideal necessarily for folks, for Wise Squirrels listening, maybe. But tell me a little bit more about like how you plan, like if you were to propose a body double session with somebody without them knowing what that is, how would you explain what to expect?
Good question. There are so many companies actually that offer like online body doubling. And I think my clients maybe even introduced me to this at first. And so, yeah, body doubling is, having the presence of someone else who cares or knows what you're doing can somehow just inspire action. Yeah. And I notice this all the time with like my students that, even if I have a math tutoring session, but somehow when I'm there, they'll open their planner, they'll start looking at the textbook, they'll start working on problems, and maybe just need a little, attention and encouragement.
So if you're working with a colleague, what does that look like for body doubling? Is it an hour long, just silently working on your webcam, doing your thing? Is it 2 hours? Is it 24 hours? Like, what is it exactly?
I mean, you can set the time. I mean, my sessions are usually 50 minutes. And I mean, sometimes I'll just invite a friend in the room, like at my office, like if we both have like work to do, we're working on some, spreadsheets, presentations, emails. It's like, hey, do you want to work together on stuff? And it's just having someone's presence there is really great. I signed up myself too when I was like trying to study for a test. It was really hard when I was getting my, therapy law and ethics exam. I realized like if I set up body doubling sessions with my friend, then I wouldn't want to let down my friend and like not show up. And once I can get myself to show up, I'll often, pull stuff off that I don't even expect. And so I would, complete my practice tests. And then ultimately, because I had those sessions scheduled and I just worked on my practice tests during those times, I took the real one and passed.
Is there danger in proposing a body double session with a friend and spending that hour talking about what you did last weekend?
That is, I think, why these other companies that offer body doubling sessions and like co-working sessions, they'll call them, have been popular, or why people will hire coaches, because having a friend who cares about you and wants to chat may not be the most effective, consistent support system for your.
Yeah. I mean, when you describe a body double service, and now that you mentioned it, I do recall seeing one. Right away, that makes me think of like back in like early mid 2000s, as social media was kind of getting popular. There was a website called Chat Roulette. Have you ever heard of this?
Oh my gosh! Wow, I do remember that.
And so Chat Roulette was amazing. It was just such an interesting thing because so basically, you would go to the website and see someone's webcam. They knew that you could see them, and you would see them for a minute, and that there'd be like a little timer, and then it would switch to someone else's webcam. And so it was, and they could see you. So you would be looking at each other for a minute and or two or whatever it was, but you couldn't like communicate beyond that. And inevitably, somebody with a penis would ruin it for everyone.
I do recall.
And I remember showing this to colleagues at work, and of course, that's like the third video was a dude stark naked, and I was like, please don't call HR. So how does that compare to? Because I
never thought of those as similar. Because I guess there are companies like Focused, or I guess like Focus Mate, or what are some of the other ones? I mean, they're just, and sometimes they'll have like a professional facilitator, who guides you into like what the project is that you want to complete during that time. Oh,
okay. So, that's interesting. So
you may have like a little video chat for like a few minutes, and then you put yourself on mute and work for whatever the set time period is, and then check in at the end. And then there's also, accountability, because you have names and it's not random, and you're signed up, and you may develop relationships with the host and your colleagues. So
that's interesting. Okay. And everybody's fully clothed.
Yes, I guess in all the ones I've been to, that's a given.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's good. All right. Well, to be mindful of time here, and because I just went to weird places,
drop what you need to out of this one.
Are there any questions that I didn't ask you? Anything that you wanted to share before we wrap up our conversation here?
I'm just thrilled that you have this, Dave. Honestly, it's really great to talk with you and to connect with people who are finding what works for them, and sharing all the great things and all the challenges that come with ADHD. So I really appreciate your courage and your leadership in making this happen.
Thank you. And how can people get a hold of you, Christina? How can they learn more about what you do and get in touch?
Walk with Christina. You can find me on the internet. Or you can email me, or Facebook, Instagram. I would love to hear from people who resonate and who I might be the right fit to help.
Cool. So walkwithchristina.com, right?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks so much. This has been fun.
Appreciate it, Dave. Have a great rest of your day.
Hey, thanks a million for listening to the podcast today. It is awesome to have you here. There's a thing about being a content creator that without feedback, it's hard to know how things are going. So I've included a survey, plus our brand new Patreon and more, available at wisesquirrels.com/love. Head over there now, let me know how I'm doing, and hey, if you like what you hear, maybe chip in a few bucks. I've got more great content in store for you, and I'm excited to share it soon. Stay tuned, and don't forget to follow the show and leave a review. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.